you're very welcome to our very special webinar. This is special for us because, as you all know, we've done a series of webinars, and this is the Europeana webinar on webinars. So it's our crowning glory from our series, our spring and summer series that we've been running the last few months. And the we, this royal we, is the Europeana Communicators, and we're a specialist community, and we belong, as you all know, to the European Network Association. And we are communicators, we're professionals from museums, libraries and galleries and archives, and across Europe and beyond. And today, beyond means the States as well, which is really nice. Welcome from Washington. I'm always very impressed that people get up early to come to our webinars. Thank you. Our goal is to strengthen the digital cultural heritage community, the sector, by promoting digital cultural heritage in action. And we support each other and aim to be the best communicator professionals that we can be. So, welcome to our webinar. And just a bit of housekeeping before we start. Please continue introducing yourselves into the chat. It's important for us in the panel, and it's important for everybody to know who's here. Oh, very interesting. I keep reading the chat. I really shouldn't. Just notice that the webinar is being recorded, and it may be made available. So if anybody finds this difficult, then just contact us, and we can edit anything you want out. If you say something really silly and you regret it, we can do something about it. And of course, those who are not part of our community, do join our community, and you can see the link here. And the last bit of, two more bits of housekeeping. We have a survey. Traditionally, we have a survey at the end of our webinar, which helps us learn. We hear from you, and we learn from everything you say. And of course, while you're listening to our amazing Europeana panelists today, don't forget to tweet. Tweet, tweet, tweet. So how is this going to work today? First of all, I'll introduce you to our panel, and you can see their smile. Please wave, everybody. You can see their smiling faces. Just make sure you're alive out there. Yay, and awake and alert and ready to go. Of course, you can ask questions in the Zoom function. We've actually asked you to produce questions beforehand, which we've collated and we will be using during the panel discussion. But the best part for us, and I hope you'll enjoy it, is our Tana Libera Tutti, the free-for-all at the end, where we turn off the recording and we keep Zoom open for another half an hour, I think it is, for the discussion. And so nothing here will be made available afterwards, and you're very, very welcome to stay and join in and participate. So we like this part a lot. So today, for me, this is a really special webinar because although Beth and I have run a number of webinars over the last few months, this is a Europeana webinar. These are our colleagues who are mostly sitting, well, they would be sitting in the Europeana office or wherever their office is if they'd been at work. Of course, they're not at work, nobody is. But they're all over the place, and that's rather nice. But they all belong to our Europeana team. So I'm Susan Hazan, and I'm moderating today. Our wonderful Gina. Gina, say hi over there. She's our Europeana Foundation's event manager. And over the years, she's produced the most amazing events all around Europe. Very, very talented lady. We're all very fond of her. Sebastiaan, our very talented, what are you? You're the Europeana's Foundation Knowledge Development Specialist, also a musician, very creative, very supportive. And Ariadna, the manager of the European Copyright Community and Europeana Foundation's Junior Policy Advisor. Hi, Ariadna. And of course, Beth, our very own manager of the European Communications Community and Europeana's Foundation's Editorial Advisor. So we have a really great panel here, and we're ready to go. So let me hand you over to Gina and Sebastiaan. I think you're starting.
Hello, everybody. It's so nice to see all of you, and I'm very happy that you joined us all. So to start, as you can guess, moving from physical to virtual meetings was a challenge, but we managed, and we needed to switch very quickly, and we could do so with a huge effort of the whole team and the rest of Europeana. We're very fortunate to have an amazing and a great team. We also weren't afraid to make some mistakes because we were building a plane while we were flying. It's different to organize online events instead of in person. There's really a huge difference. We started a journey and we looked at a tool that we thought that would really fit us. There's a lot of tools out there. We checked some, but because we had 2 very important meetings ahead of us and we wanted to use breakout rooms, we limited ourselves in our choices. So we started to use and test first Zoom. We kept the team small, so we had really short communication strings, and this really helped. With a lot of meetings and tests, really a lot of tests. So the first 2 meetings we organized, that was the Europeana Aggregator Forum, including a copyright workshop. And both of those days, we had about 60 people, and it was a really intense program. We made sure the program was entertaining and diverse. So not only presenting, and it was very much lean forward instead of a leaning back meeting. Together with Europeana, we organized Europe Day. And it was a high-level webinar, a 1-hour session, 500 people joined. And it was a really engaging presentation and a panel session. And it included our own commissioner, Mariah Gabriel. So here you see, I love this picture because it really shows you how much we've done since April and until today. Like not only the amazing Susan and Beth, who've created so many Europeana Communicator webinars, also like the Aggregator Forum, but also the copyright community and education. They've all done their best to go out there and entertain people online with like amazing activities. This is like, it looks like rocket science. It's not. It's, when we started, we also experienced that the amount of documents increased like tremendously. And we realized that we needed to start like a document where everything was to be found, but also that we could share with others. So we could give them a little tool on what we've learned so far. So we will, in here you see the events checklist, there's a survey template, there's a planning template, also a participant's handbook example we used. And this document, you see the QR code. If you can use it, please go right ahead. It will take you to the Europeana Guide to Run Online Events 2020. And it's an amazing document and we're really proud of it. Please keep in mind, it's still a working document because we are still learning. And now I go to Sebastiaan, who takes over and tells you more about the inside of an event and the formats.
Starting an event or organizing the event online is different from an event that you do physically. You have to think about the outcomes first, because the choices you make in setting up an online event determine if you are able to do things. So outcomes of an online event can be sharing knowledge or engaging with your audience and get input from them, and support networking between the people that are in your audience, but also to create common ground, share ideas and see if you think the same about that. That's different in a physical meeting and in an online meeting, because all the tools that you can use. Oh, I skipped one. Online, it's very important to make the best use of the time that you have together. Sitting together in a room, being in a location, you can walk away, get a coffee, and that's not possible when you're online together. So what's the best use of the time together? And we've changed a couple of things around to make it as interactive as possible. We keep our meetings short, and we do regularly short questions and polls to keep the audience engaged. So instead of firing out information and knowledge hours after hours, we try to keep it to 15 minutes, 30 minutes max of giving information and then do something interactive. We also decided to flip the classroom. That means that you're not listening in to presentations all the time, but when possible, we ask people to make a video of what they want to present. We send out those videos days before the event, so people have time to watch those videos before the event starts. And then we use the time together for discussion about those videos. So instead of just listening, we're facilitating the interaction again. Also online, it's important to train and prepare speakers and facilitators. Being behind your computer is totally different from getting up on the stage. And a lot of people are used to work on their slides until the last minute before they enter the stage. And that's not possible when you're doing something online. And most important, plan on what you share before, during, and after the event, because once the event is running, it's hard to make changes to what you're doing. All the platforms are different and they all have different functionality. So you have to think about what is it that I want to accomplish in this event and what platform fits best to that event. To get an oversight of this, we've started working on an online events checklist. It's linked to the documents that we just showed the QR code of, and it's work in progress. So this will change over the next months constantly, but the links you have are to the direct working documents. So if you give feedback to me or us, we can put it in here and you always have access to the latest file. These are the questions that you should ask yourself before, during, and after an event, before you even start preparing the event or in the preparation of the event. Because you can see, maybe not in this page, but when you download this poster, you can see lines going from the lower questions to the top questions. That means that if you want to be able to share the video, for example, that you have to say to people that you are going to film it or maybe announce it in the invitation. So those are questions that have an effect in the beginning while it's something that you want to do afterwards. Now, these are a lot of questions and just a few words is not enough information. So we are writing out these questions in this extremely big spreadsheet. And we also want to put in the compatibility. As said, some platforms can do more than other platforms. Ultimately, in the spreadsheet, you can find the questions, a description of the question, some practical information, and if a platform is compatible to do that with you. Finally, it's also about building digital capacity. We as a team have supported so many events lately, but there are more and more events happening every day, like this webinar. So we had to hand over the keys more. So apart from supporting these events, we're also training our colleagues in hosting and facilitating these events to increase their facilitation skills. How do you facilitate an event like this? And also to evaluate as a team, not only on paper, but to spend some time after the event. So how did it go for you? And how did it go for me? And we try to share our lessons within our organization as much as possible to keep growing in our online events. This was my piece of information. Now it's time for questions, and then we go to the panel. Suzanne.
I will start with the questions. Now, these are questions we asked you, our participants, beforehand, and we've sifted through them, and we've chosen a series of questions here. And I hope that our speakers have had an opportunity to think about them a bit, and I look forward to hearing your answers. So our first question, how do you encourage participants to interact in the webinar? Who would like to answer this? Beth, would you like to answer this?
I'd love to. Thank you very much. And it's really great to be on this side of the webinar, actually talking to people rather than being behind the scenes. So hi to everyone. I wanted to just run through a few of the things that we're doing today in this webinar to encourage people to interact. So first thing we did was before the webinar, in the registration, we had an opportunity there to ask people what they wanted to talk about. We gave you a selection of questions, and that's how we've come up with these few questions that we're going to answer now. They're your top questions, we hope. So that's one way. Then when you arrived, Susan created a really friendly, welcoming atmosphere by calling you out by name and saying hello. And we invited you to introduce yourselves in the chat. And I think that's really important because you want to create an atmosphere in which people feel that they want to participate and interact, that it's not intimidating. So throughout the webinars we've done, the Culture from Home, we've used the chat function and the Q&A to take questions. And we also encourage you to tweet, to use our hashtag Europeana communities. That's another way of interacting sort of beyond the webinar itself, out into the world. After this panel session, Sebastiaan's going to take us through an interaction where we use Mentimeter, which is another platform external to the webinar platform that we're doing. So where we get to ask you questions rather than you asking us questions, and we'll talk about them. And we found that through our survey responses, you can never have enough discussion time in a webinar. And that's why we came up with the Tana Libera Tutti concept, which is the last session in today's webinar, where we make it as close as possible to being in a room with people. So like Susan said, we turn off the recording and we make people visible if they want to be visible. And we don't have a set agenda or questions that we're going to ask at that point. It becomes more of a people in a room talking to each other. So my top tips would be plan interaction into your schedule and then plan some more. And I think that's maybe what Ariadne did. Yeah.
Are we sharing our screens? Somebody sharing?
No, I think Tamara, you can stop sharing now if that's okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it'd be nice to see everybody as
there
this.
We go.
Yeah, Ariadne, would you like to answer that? How do you deal with how do you encourage people to interact with the webinars that you've run?
Yeah, thanks, Susan. So, well, you'll find all the answers in the documents that Gina and Sebastiaan prepared, but I just wanted to share a bit of my experience when collaborating with the Museum Computer Network and with Open GLAM through the copyright community at Europeana to organize a series of webinars around Open GLAM and copyright. Because our idea was, rather than getting a series of speakers to share knowledge and transfer them to the audience, it was more like we wanted to find a way to make this whole thing an exchange of ideas among the speakers, among the audience, and across these two groups. And so we tried to look for an interactive approach from the get-go as we designed the webinar. So all we do every time we organize one of webinar for this series is simply to prepare a couple of questions in advance that we send to the speakers. And then during the webinar, the whole webinar is led through these questions that we moderate and through questions that we see on the chat. So the whole thing is a question and answer webinar, and giving the floor to the questions in the chat allows us to also bring in the thoughts from the audience that these are very relevant questions to them that we cannot foresee in advance, that we wouldn't imagine would be relevant to them. And so we've seen it becomes a really interesting experience where there's an exchange of ideas that you cannot foresee. So just by having this flexibility and by inviting people to be interactive, a lot of new knowledge is created that we wouldn't be able to create otherwise.
And of course, you keep the chat and document it, and yeah, it's precious input. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, Ariadne, thank you. And Sebastiaan, sorry, you ran the very successful Aggregators Forum and the very complex Europe Day. How do you keep your participants interactive and engaged?
Well, what I wanted to tell a bit more about, because Ariadne, her workshops were also during the Aggregator Forum, and we talked about Q&A and chat. Q&A and chat are very depending on the size of the audience you have. You know, if you have 1,000 people listening in, you probably don't want to chat because the chat will be moving so fast that you cannot keep control of it. And probably you don't know all the people that are in it. So we have some basic ideas on when do we turn on chat. You know, this is a pretty small group. We've got 55 people listening into it, to this webinar, and we know most of these people. So having chat is probably not a problem. Q&A, you have design choices too in your Q&A. Do you want all the questions to be visible to all participants? Well, what is the audience? If you turn off chat for a large audience, then probably you don't want all the Q&As to be visible too, because people will start using the Q&A as an alternative to the chat. So in Zoom and in some other platforms, you have the option to only show the answered questions. So in a large audience, I would suggest that you only give people a Q&A option, and you only show them the answers that have been answered live or that have been answered by text. It also means that you've got to have the people to answer those questions or to shift those questions around. If you're only one person that's chairing a webinar, you don't have the time to look at those Q&As and to answer them or live or in text. So you need a couple of co-hosts that help you out in going through those answers. So the larger the audience, probably the more restrictive you want to be in the options you give them to ask questions, and the more help you need in streamlining the entire process. If you have like 20 people available, yes, you can turn on chat for 1,000 people. But if you're only with 3 people running an event, please turn chat off. Then also other options for interaction. We'll do a Mentimeter a bit later. But some platforms have the options to put in a Q&A or to put in polls. But you can also have something external like Mentimeter. We've had people using Google Polls, Google Forms to ask questions. So it's also a design choice. Are you going to use all the tools within the platform? Or are you going to use the tools that are separate from the platforms, that you can have more control over those tools or more options? For example, the interaction tools in Zoom, those polls are just radio buttons, or you know, that you can answer multiple questions, multiple things at the same time, but it's not as interactive as a Mentimeter, as a Google Form.
Yeah, and I think your point is taken. As a moderator, I'm enjoying reading the chat, but I can't possibly get to the Q&A that's being written. We have 2 questions, but I know Beth is reading them behind the scenes, and she will answer both the National Library of Scotland, I've forgotten who were there, and of course Kate, but we can't do this in real time because we're really kind of too busy with our own dialogue. But let me just ask this question more specifically, both to Gina and to you, Sebastiaan. What are the pros and cons of the different discussion formats? Now, you've had a lot of experience between you. What's your call on this? Gina?
Pros and cons on either using webinar or meeting, or, sorry, I didn't get it.
Okay, but the different, you have that wonderful diagram in the kit that you're going to be sending out to you lucky participants, because this is a brand new kit and you'll be the first to see it. You've actually written out a really nice diagnosis of all the different things that are possible. Sebastiaan, do you want to talk about that? Or have you had said enough in your last comment?
Well, I think I've said enough, but it's basically the main question is, what is it that you want to reach? What's the goal of the event? And what's the size of the event? Because it's not possible to start talking with 1,000 people. And if it's up to 100, you can have a meeting. And if it's only a keynote speaker, do you want to have a meeting with a keynote speaker, or do you want to have a webinar with the speaker? That depends on what kind of interaction you can have. And apart from the size, my question also is, do you trust the people that are in the room?
Oh.
Do you know them? Will they behave? And if there's like only a small option that people will not behave, well, then make it a webinar instead of a meeting.
Yeah. Can I think I agree with all of you. I'm sorry that I misunderstood the question. I think whatever's been said is true. And it's been said already, but I think first thing is planning. And that's what especially Beth is also really, really good at. And start at the end. Don't start at the beginning, start at the end. What do I want? What do I want to give my participants? And then you go backwards, like, what do I want to share with them? And indeed, the safety thing. It's, do I want to risk that somebody takes over? Or do I want to keep everything good under control? am I having 1,000 people that I really know, or are there names that I don't know? Then decide to do a webinar, so you keep that control.
Don't provoke our audience, please.
No,
Mariana,
no, it's like it's a worry, and we know it is. And but we've run amazing things with beautiful people, and yeah, everything worked out really, really well. So
yeah, Mariana is also concerned about this. I see in the chat. We all are, but so far we've been very lucky. But okay, let's change the subject now. And I think something that's incredibly important. What about the impact? What are we trying to get out of all this? You know, what's the point of it all? And Beth, I know you've looked at this, you researched this, you've documented this. So do you want to kick this off? The impact, these webinars?
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's what Sebastiaan's already said, is that you need to think about what impact you want to create at the beginning. Don't leave thinking about your results to the end. And it's not always easy to do. With the culture from home, we were acting very, very quickly. And I think the impact that we wanted to achieve at the beginning was fairly simple. It was to create a space in which we could just bring people together, a chance to talk to each other and share experiences. So it was very much, if we delivered a webinar that people came to and people spoke, then we would have delivered the impact that we wanted to achieve. But we also achieved some sort of unplanned impacts that we could, things that were measurable. We found that the number of visits to our Europeana Communicators webpage, for example, went up something like 4 times as much as normal, I think, and that the number of people joining our community went up quite substantially as well. And I don't think we can take that to be totally from the webinars, but the webinars definitely helped. And I think we can say that there's an assumption that running the series of webinars increased interest in our community. So that's an impact. And I think there's sort of 2 really great opportunities to gather the data to have a look at your impact. And that's in the registration and in your post-webinar survey. So you might have noticed in when you signed up for this webinar, you were asked a question about your confidence levels in the topic. And that's a very broad question. And it has to be, because it's used on all of the Europeana events. And what we do is that we ask the same question in the post-webinar survey. And you know, this could be any question that's relevant to your event, but you ask the same one before and the same one after. You can chart if there's any difference in those 2 values, and therefore if you've created an event, if you've created an impact. And we also use our post-webinar surveys to get not just quantitative information, because knowing how many registrations or attendees or where they're from is great, but it doesn't necessarily tell you what impact, what change in the world you've created. So if you can ask some qualitative questions, find out what people's sort of emotional reactions to your webinar is. We found ours, people said that it brought them together. They were really grateful for that feeling of togetherness. That's quite a difficult impact to sort of quantify, but it's certainly very, very valuable. And there is a Europeana impact community. So if you're interested in that, you can go and have a look there, and they've got an impact playbook, and they show you how to do impact assessments, which I believe Gina knows something about from the Europeana 2019 event.
I wanted to say something completely different.
Oh, sorry, Gina. You say something completely different.
I was like, oh, I want. No, sorry, I wanted to talk about the impact of the social impact this has, because the moment we started doing this, we realized that, and Susan is great at it, she welcomes everybody, names everybody, and people feel so like, I belong. And this is like, to me, this is also, although we have amazing topics, it's so important. Unfortunately, now we can't see each other, but there are meetings where you can see each other, or you see us. And in the chat, you can talk to each other. You realize everybody is in the same situation. And we've organized also the digital transformation workshops. And there they've asked like really, nice questions, good questions. And also that was really important, like the social thing that you get when you are meeting online, because we do miss each other. We do want to know and look at each other and make sure we're all okay. So,
of course, we can all look at each other in just half an hour, because we're going to have our Tana Libera Tutti. So you can all show us your smiling faces, put your names up and have a real conversation, which is actually always the best part of our meetings. But just a quick, have a look in the chat. Anybody feels at home and feels welcome, just write that in the chat now so we can get some feedback. Maybe you're all asleep or eating lunch or something, or just left the webinar and gone off to watch TV or something, or taken the dog for the walk. So a little feedback in the chat would be really nice for us. Just anything, just say hi or one or anything. Anyway, I want to ask the last question that you asked the participants as you registered. And thank you. And anybody who has ever run a webinar knows how worrying this can be. What happens when it goes wrong? And we have enough experience here. So Seb, would you like to answer that? How we deal with this when things go
yes,
wrong?
please.
Thank you.
So to be honest, the first big webinar we did that without a plan B. If anything would have gone wrong during that event, we didn't know what to do. And when we started doing the sense-making workshops, we had a lot of questions on people not being able to connect, technology failing, stuff like that. So we started thinking about fire drills and protocols. The protocols are, if A happens, B does C. So what does somebody do when something unexpected happens or something that you don't want to happen? Like a keynote speaker that cannot connect, or a critical person that has audio problems. The platform is down 10 minutes before you start your meeting. So we have texts ready, email texts that can be sent out to participants very quickly. In our case, by Gina or Tamara, who's in the background. Tamara has turned her camera off, but she's a critical part of our team. She's like the best virtual host you can have. And it has the advantage, first, it gives you a sense of control. Thinking about everything that can go wrong, writing down what you want to do or can do when something goes wrong, makes it easier to get in the modus, in the mode that things can go wrong and that you are in control. So you have your protocols, then you have to test them. You know, you just have to do a fire drill. Just make a meeting with a couple of colleagues and pretend that the platform is down. How many steps does it take to do the things that you thought of doing? Because if that means that you have to fire up your email program, wait for your computer to get to that, make an email, put all the addresses in, copy the text and send it out. If it takes you 5 minutes, well, that's 4 minutes too long in this protocol. So I suggest everyone, if you put up those protocols, if you wrote down those protocols, do fire drills with everybody involved. So we talked about educating speakers and your colleagues. If you're doing a webinar like this, you should do a fire drill with the people in the webinar. So if this happens, this is our solution. And also to give the speakers a sense of control too, that they know that somebody is doing stuff on the background if things don't work out like that.
But in my experience, and all through our webinars, and every single moment, there's been tomorrow. And I think everybody should have a tomorrow, basically. Tamara, can you just show your face, because you're always so quiet, and give us an opportunity to thank you? And you're absolutely amazing. And although this is a very specific tomorrow, everybody needs a tomorrow, because you need somebody you can rely on, somebody who's on the button, and somebody who cares and is involved and is always there, and someone we can rely on. So yeah, thank you, Tamara. And this is my advice: get a tomorrow. Ariadna, you have a comment to make, I hope?
Yeah, I thought I could just quickly share my very clumsy experience from a non-expert perspective, so that people see that the worst that can happen is not that bad. We made it through. But definitely, I think preparation is the key to success. But something I also found out is that sometimes there might be things that are beyond your control, unless you can really devote yourself to every to every single detail. But for some type of webinars, that might be a bit disproportionate. So there were a couple of things that happened that were under, that should have been under control. Maybe that's where I didn't listen to my colleagues enough. But for instance, We had a webinar where we were using a tool that only allowed 100 participants to join, and here's where we should have done more research on the tool, because one day participant 101 joined, and rather than getting like the participant being stopped from joining or us getting a warning, the call was ended completely. So we were all kicked out of the webinar, including the moderators and organizers. Something else that we should have foreseen was that time where we kept asking people to put their cameras off, and that ended up really messing up with the bandwidth from the actual speakers that we actually had to see. And even though it was on the chat and we kept repeating it, that tool did not allow us to do it automatically, and people who would join later wouldn't be aware. So that's another issue that we should have thought about. But then one problem that that we encountered that I'm not sure how we could have solved, but maybe now that Sebastiaan raises that, maybe there was a way. But we did all the tests that were necessary. All the speakers could manage the technology fine. Everything was working. And then at some point, halfway through the webinar, we couldn't see or hear one of the speakers. There were only 3 of them, and it was supposed to be a dialogue among them. So you really notice it when there's one gone. And that's the thing where, even though we did tons of tests, we have no clue why this happens. Maybe having a plan B would have been good in that occasion.
Thank you. Does anybody else, before we go to our Mentimeter and Sebastiaan, does anybody else from our panel like to make any other comments? Beth, would you like to say something now?
Just on the problems very, very quickly, our very first webinar back in last August, we lost one of our speakers the day before for completely unforeseen circumstances. We didn't know that was going to happen. And what happened was that Susan, who was supposed to be moderator, stepped in as a speaker with a project that just happened to fit that she was involved in, and then I, who was supposed to be behind the scenes, stepped up to be moderator. So since then, every time we've sort of had someone in the back of our mind thinking, if we drop out, if a presenter drops out, we're going to ask this person, and it's usually someone from our steering group that we can ask, that we know can call on. So that's quite a good thing to keep in mind, I think.
Adrian, you're asking a question, what advice would you give to speakers before speaking? My only advice is a glass of water. Anybody else want to field that? What advice would you give to speakers?
Well, we provide them with a presenter brief at the very beginning of the process, which includes all the information about what they need to know, what the organisation is, what the webinar is in context, exactly what we want them to do, the slide deck we want them to use, of every single piece of information we think they'll need. And we do a test beforehand to make sure that we can see and hear them. I guess I don't know that we've actually done this, but if you have, maybe if you're worried about your speaker, give them some tips on how to present, to talk slowly, which I'm probably talking too fast right now, to have a glass of water to hand, and to, I think actually I have over email with a couple of people who have been a bit worried because they've not done it before, to tell them we're not trying to produce something perfect, but that we are all humans and we're all working from home and we're all doing our best, and to just please take it as an opportunity to enjoy themselves and to just share the expertise that they have, because that's why they've been invited.
Thank you very much, Beth, and everybody. Sebastiaan, it's up to you now. We would like to hear from our participants. So
yes.
we've chosen the Mentimeter. Over to you, please.
And so I would like to ask everybody to get out their phones or another device, and then go to this Mentimeter you can now see. Am I right?
Yep.
So I'll give you a few seconds to go there.
You put the link as well in the chat. If somebody hasn't got can't take the screen, the QR code.
You go to menti.com, menti.com, and it asks you for a code, and then you can use the code 675113. Then I'll go to the first question, because before organizing this event, we also had our questions to you that we want to ask. So The first question we want to ask you is, how many webinars have you taken part in live in the last 3 months? And I'll just leave this open for a second so you can cast your votes. And while they are coming in, let me play you some music on the background. I can see people have been very active. 14 people that have more than 10 plus webinars in the last 3 months. So that's once a week at least. And I'll just wait until the numbers are close to the amount of people that we have in this webinar. We had 56 participants and 44 people have voted right now. And it's almost everyone. But as you can see, people have been very active in following webinars online. Let me go to the next question for you. How many webinars, and not just Europeana webinars, have you watched the recordings of in the last 3 months? Because a lot of webinars are recorded. You cannot always make it to a webinar. You signed up and then afterwards you're like, oh, I completely forgot about it. Happened to me a couple of times. And then you have the recordings of those. But do you take the time to watch those recordings? 36 people answered right now.
Sebastian, Valentina asks whether it includes university lessons.
Good question. If that's a webinar, yes. Yes, Valentina, put those in too. You can see the numbers that most people in the last 3 months only looked at 1 to 5 of those webinars. We've got a couple of diehards that did 10 plus. I don't have a question prepared for this, but I'm wondering how long those webinars were, because, you know, are those webinars of 30 minutes or 2-hour sessions? If you could leave that in the chat, that would be awesome. How long were the webinars that you've watched online? Let me go to the next question for you. So you sign up for an event, but you can't make it, or there's something else that comes up that's important. So how committed do you feel to attend an online event after you signed up? It's 1 to 10, where 0 to 10. 0 is you're not committed at all. It's like, no, I'll just sign up and maybe I'll watch the recording later, which we saw not a lot of people do. Or do you feel responsible to be part of it? That it feels like a ticket to a physical event, and like you want to be attending the event, you also want to acknowledge the fact that you are needed for the event too. 46 people have voted and it's an 8 on average, which is very high. It's a very committed audience over here. In my experience, we had over 1,000 people that were registering for the first big online webinar that we had, but only 500 people showed up. And in the chat, we've got some answers on the length of the videos of the webinars. Usually a webinar is an hour or an hour and a half. Let me go to the next question. How do you feel about attending webinars? Are you fed up with webinars? Are they getting better, but you know, you'd rather have a physical meeting? Or do you love the fact that you can follow a webinar from the luxury of your own home? They're getting better, so not very positive or negative either. And only a few people that are really fed up with webinars. Oh, more people are loving them. Then the next questions will probably be obvious to you. 46 people have voted, which is like the average number I've seen in the votes so far. To go to the next question. This is an open question, and take your time to put in your answer. But how would you describe the worst experience you've had with an online event so far? What's the worst thing that happened? And once you've entered your answer, you can enter more. So you can give multiple answers in this question. Technical things, microphones not working, limited bandwidth. That's a very important one. It's also something I'm looking into personally. How can we make these events open to anyone, that your bandwidth is not limiting? Boring presentations. And someone that hasn't had a bad experience yet, that's very convenient. The meeting was hacked. Oh, maybe you've seen me drinking from my mug. It says, I will mute you. And it was a gift from a couple of friends from mine because I had to use the mute all button once. And that story started living around my friends. Somebody was left in the waiting room for half of the event. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Mic's not working. Late starts. 42 answers right now. I'm going to leave this open for a few seconds. Struggling to keep focused. Yep. Email and Slack. It's very important to be focused during an event like this. Turn everything off that can be a distraction. Event's taking longer than planned. And now let me go to the last question for you. How would you describe your best experience you've had with an online event? So what is it that you really liked? And again, you can put in multiple answers over here. Well, this is very quiet for now. Possibilities to engage. Yep, being able to attend while working from home. On the Dutch radio, they had a game if somebody was wearing pants or not. So during the game, they would go to someone that was working from home and they would ask him, did you take the time to get dressed properly or not? Which I thought was very funny. Good prepared events with good chemistry. Yep, being invited to participate. That's very important too. Getting real connections with people and being entertained, very informative. Great tips provided by other people in the chat. That's what I love about events too. That it's not a one-to-one conversation, but it's an end-to-end conversation. It's so easy to have more interaction with all of the people attending it, like you're doing in the chat with each other and also in this Mentimeter. 29 questions, 29 answers so far. I'll leave it open. When we have a great moderator as Susan, I cannot agree more. And open to show how vulnerable we are. Yes, that's very important too. I'll give you a couple of more seconds. Also, I know there are only 2 songs on loop in the background. I personally made the mistake once to start playing music, but that was copyrighted music. And we were not broadcasting it. It was an internal event, but still it was something we had to think about. So the music you're hearing right now is something that I created myself. So at least I know there's no copyright infringement possible at all. 35 questions, 35 answers. Great answers. We'll be sharing these answers with you later, of course. Oh, I see toddlers coming in the chat. That's true too. An Europeana pets webinar. I'm not sure what they mean with that, but that's for after this event. I'm gonna close this question. Thank you so much for your answers. And back to you, Suzanne.
I know what they mean by pets popping in. I think that's great. I love it when kids come in. David, if you're still here, we love seeing your kids. And anybody else's, and Tamara, your cat, and all the other people that make their little appearances when they didn't really expect to be. I know my husband comes in sometimes and looks into my screen and says, "Oh, you're online again." Hi, David. Yeah, they're a pleasure. They're sweet. Yeah, so we have all these kind of people and animals and children who make kind of these cameo appearances, and they're unexpected, and that's actually really delightful. I think there's been a couple that have been very famous on BBC, CNN, when kids have come in to watch Mummy, who's broadcasting from the spare room, and they want a biscuit, they want a drink. I think that's the best thing. Anyway, so if you would like to find out more about us, so please join the Europeana Communicators. Here's the short link here, Europeana's Communicators, and it's very important for us to have this survey, so please go to the survey. I know without even looking that Beth is automatically putting this into the chat, so that you don't have to worry about copying it from the screen. And of course, your tweets during and after are more than welcome. So we have a few more minutes before we go to the Tan Liberi Tutti, when we turn off the recording. We're still recording, and I think it's now, let's have an open screen and any questions. I'm going to go to the chat, and I'm going to go to the Q&A and see if there's anything that anybody would like to ask. So, how do we deal with conflict, bullying, aggression by audience, anonymous attendee during a webinar? Do attendees do they agree to follow a code? Well, we have never had, as far as I know, we haven't had that problem. Would anybody else like to answer that? Do we have any bullying? Has it ever happened? And do we open up our do we have a potential bullier who's anonymous in our audience? Has anybody come across that? No?
I've had people fighting, well, not fighting, but having an argument in a session, and they were hijacking the event by shouting at each other. Well, specifically one person was shouting, and every time somebody tried to answer, the shouting became louder and longer. And that's when I had to engage my mute all button. So it's not really bullying, but you shouldn't be afraid to use your powers as a moderator to mute other people if they are not behaving the way that you want them to behave.
I think it's not bullying at all, but I think the funny thing is people don't realize they've left their mute button or their mic open, and we can hear, stuff going on. And you see, I don't know if you can see me now, but you suddenly hear an entire phone call. Someone gets a phone call, take their phone, and they're having a whole conversation, and we all hear the entire conversation. So that happens quite a lot. But yeah, Ariadna, yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes me think there's an interesting question. Sometimes when we organize webinars and Gina or Tamara say, I give you control so that I can manage the mic, we joke about it, but actually you're given, imagine there's someone who says something that you actually disagree with or that makes you uncomfortable. You've got this power of muting these people, but in the end, it's very disruptive to be able to do this. Now we always have friendly conversations, but if it was something more serious, you sort of give the floor for a certain topic and a certain conversation, but then you are the one who gets to say what can be said and not. So sometimes we need to think about using this carefully.
Danasu, you said you had a hacker. That's not good. Using bad words. Ooh, not good. Anybody else got any more questions that you'd like to ask? We've just a few minutes left while you have this opportunity to talk to the panelists. I'm very happy that you've actually got good advice and tips from everybody. Bye, David. It's good to see you. Yeah, anybody else have any questions? If not, we will move on. I just want to thank everybody. As always, I had a wonderful time. And I had a particularly wonderful time today because of our wonderful speakers from Europeana. We always have guests that I've never met before, and it's exciting to hear from new people, and especially the quality of work we've seen and we've enjoyed in our own webinars. But this is an opportunity to turn to the family, to turn to the Europeana group that work together really very much as a team. And it's really a delight to see people move into the limelight, like Gina, Beth, Ariadna, Sebastiaan, and Tamara, who's very modest and behind the scenes. It's really good to see your faces and to hear your voices and to learn so much from your experience over these months. So I want to thank you as speakers and friends, and look forward to meeting in person in The Hague, maybe in the future. Would be lovely.